The best way to get reliable results from your AI is to add approval steps or feedback loops into your automations. The default n8n human in the loop nodes allow you to do that, however they are quite annoying to use. If you want an AI automation to request feedback from you, for example on Telegram, then it sends you a link, you have to open that, you have to fill out a clunky form, submit the form, and only then the workflow continues and the AI can work with that feedback. To me, that is not very convenient, which is why today I'm going to show you how you can build this custom AI approval and feedback system. In this example, the AI generates a social media post and then asks me for approval if I want to publish it. So let's execute this. I received the approval message here in Telegram, and now I can either approve or reject it. Let's approve it so it is published. And you could see as soon as I completed this approval request, the message was automatically deleted again because I no longer need it. Also, if I want to give feedback to the AI, I don't have to fill out an external form here. I can just reply to that message. So for example, here I received an approval request about a tweet and I like this tweet, but I would like the AI to remove all of these hashtags. So I click on reply. Let's reply with a voice message. Good tweet, but please remove all hashtags. Now the AI receives my feedback, the old messages are deleted, and then it immediately sends me the new version of that post as a new approval request. And here you can see all of the hashtags have been removed. This time I decide to approve it, so now this has been published to social media. How cool is that? Alright, let's have a detailed look how you can build this yourself in n8n. And by the way, I will make the finished approval system available to you in the video description with a template. And with that template, you can save a little bit of time. But if you don't want to use the template, that's okay. I will also show you all of the necessary steps here in this video today. Alright, let's have a look at what happens here. In the beginning, I have a schedule trigger so that this automation runs every day. What trigger you use in your automation will depend on the type of automation that you're building. Then in the next step, I've added this basic LLM chain. So this is this node right here. This is just a generalized AI prompt that you can connect with any AI model. In this case, I connected it to OpenRouter, but you can also connect it to the OpenAI chat model. So this one right here, or if you're using Google Gemini, that's also possible. And then here inside of this, I've added a system prompt and told the AI to generate a controversial and provocative tweet because they usually tend to perform quite well. But the functionality of the approval system is not tied to this specific task here. You can use this approval system that we're building today for any type of automation that you're building. This is just what I use today for demonstration purposes. So here in the system prompt, I tell the AI to generate a slightly controversial and provocative tweet. And in the user prompt, I tell it what topic it should generate the tweet about. So here in this case, I said generate a controversial and provocative and maybe a bit funny post about SEO. So let's execute this. Okay, now the AI has generated this new post here. And then we go to the next step. Here in this next step, this is just a simple limit node that limits the amount of items that are passed into this approval loop to 1. Because this approval loop is not able to handle multiple items in one execution. It's able to handle lots of different executions with lots of different requests. But inside of a single execution, it can only handle a single item. And by the way, this is the same limitations that these n8n default human in the loop nodes have. After that, we enter the approval loop, and the first step of this approval loop is the set node called approval task. Here, basically, I define all of the data that we need to complete this task. First of all, here I have a field called data.postText, and the value of that field is just whatever post the AI generated. So the output that we receive from the previous step. Now this could also be something more advanced. You could also have a second field in here. Let's say you had an AI generate some blog posts. Then you would have maybe two fields, one called title and one called post text. But in this case, it's a simple social media post, so we only need one data field. The second field of this set node is called approval message. And here basically I just write, please approve the following tweet. And then again, the text of the tweet that the AI generated. Let's execute this, and then we get this output, which leads us to the next step. Then I take this approval task and send the approval message to myself on Telegram. But now it's really important. This node here is not the human in the loop Telegram node, but instead I use a simple Telegram send a message action. So this one right here, send a text message. I send a normal Telegram text message to myself. And by the way, if you don't know yet how to set up your Telegram connection to n8n, I've actually recorded an entire video on this YouTube channel about this topic. All right, let's look at the structure of this. Here I sent the text of the message is the approval message that we defined in the previous step. And the reply markup is inline keyboard. That is really important because this inline keyboard basically allows us to add all of these buttons. If I execute this step, you can see here I've defined 2 buttons, approve and reject, and these are the 2 buttons that will show below our message later. And what's also important is that I've added to both of these buttons a callback data. And the callback data for the approve button is the execution ID. This is just a number that is increased every time the n8n runs a new execution. And then for the approval button, comma true. And for the reject button, execution ID, comma false. And the way you can think about this callback data is that this is data that will be sent back to us when we later press one of these 2 buttons. That's basically all this callback data does. And down here, I've also made some additional settings that the n8n attribution is removed. This just makes it the message nicer to look at. All right, and now it gets really interesting because what I've done here in the next step is I've added a wait node. And the name of that wait node is wait for approval or feedback. So let's execute this. And if I open this up, you can see this is not your typical wait node configuration. By default, if you add a wait node to n8n, so let's quickly add one, the default mode is resume after time interval. And then you have to define a certain amount of time for how long this wait node should pause the automation until it continues. In this case, however, I've set the mode to resume on Webhook call. And when you do that, you can see while this node is waiting, it says waiting for input. Execution will continue when Webhook is received on, and then this URL right here. So basically, what this node now does is it will wait until we send data to this specific URL right here. And only then it will continue the rest of the execution. And now maybe you can already see what our next steps are going to be. We somehow have to find a way to send our approval event. So if I click on approve or reject here, or if I reply to this approval message with feedback, we somehow have to send this approval to this URL because that will then continue the execution. And to do that, I have created a second automation here. This is called handle approval events. And basically all this automation does, I'm going to show you all of the nodes in a second, but first of all, a higher level overview. This automation here listens for these approval events on Telegram. So it listens to a callback query. That's basically whenever I press one of these 2 buttons, that's called a callback query event. And it also listens for a message. So whenever I reply to an approval message with some feedback. Whenever such an event occurs, it will look at that event. And here in this final HTTP node, we'll send that event, the data of that approval event, back to our original automation using this webhook URL right here. That's the high-level idea of what this workflow, the handle approval events workflow, does. So let's quickly trigger such an approval event. In Telegram, I click on my approve button for this new tweet. And you can see now my original automation completes because I've now approved it. However, what happened here now in this handle approval events automation, we received this callback query. Then this set node here extracted all of the necessary IDs and data from it. And this set node might look a little bit complicated here, but all of these expressions here basically just extract the data from this first Telegram trigger step. Then we have this switch node here, and this switch node basically just determines what type of event this was. Was this a feedback message, or was this just a click on one of these 2 buttons, approve or reject? In our case, it was a click on the button. I clicked on the approve button. So the workflow routed it to this next step here called delete approval message, where I just delete the approval message again based on the ID that I determined originally. And this is actually one of my favorite parts about this workflow, because usually with these human in the loop nodes, at least with the default n8n ones, your entire chat history gets cluttered with all of these old approval request messages. But here, whenever you approve something, then the message, the approval message, is automatically deleted. So the entire chat stays clean and you never lose overview of what's going on. And finally, then here, I click on resume workflow. And here all I do is I send this approval data back to the webhook of this waiting node so that it can continue. Once I did that, you can see this wait node received that data in the body right here. You can see it says approved, true, and the feedback is empty. After which we have this switch called approval status, and this just determines was this approved or did this receive any feedback. If it was approved, in our case it was approved, so it published the tweet to Twitter or to X. In this case it did not actually publish it, but just outputs it here in this set node, because I don't want to now post random stuff on my Twitter account just for this demo tutorial. Alright, let's trigger this again. So I pinned my tweet here so I can run this a bit quicker. We receive a new approval message, and let's see what happens if I click on reject here. If I click on reject, the automation also continued, because here in this handle approval event automation, I received this reject button click. Then the event type switch node here determines, oh, this was the reject button, so this path right here. It deleted the approval message and sent my reject button event back to our wait node webhook. Once I did that, the webhook here received that information. You can see approve is false and feedback is empty. And this means none of the two rules here for the switch node are satisfied. The post was not approved and it did not receive any feedback, meaning it was rejected. And then this switch node here does not produce any output, which means the automation stops, which is exactly what I want when I reject a post. Let's run this again and let's look at the most interesting scenario, which is when we want to give some feedback to the AI. I execute this again. And this time I'm going to respond with a feedback message. So I reply to this, send a voice message. Good tweet, but please remove all hashtags. All right, and now you can see it implemented that feedback and removed all hashtags and then sent me a new approval request with the updated version. This time, if I go to my execution, what happened was n8n received this approval event. In this case, it was a feedback message. So a voice message, as we can see down here. It again extracted all of the necessary IDs that we need to complete this approval task. And then this switch node here determined, oh, this is actually not a press on one of these two buttons. It is actually a feedback message. So it routed the entire data up here to this upper branch where it parsed the feedback message. And this is a sub-workflow execution right here. So you can see I just put the message that I receive from the Telegram trigger into here as input. And basically, let's have a look at this. This is a very simple automation that just takes the message that we receive. So here, this message object. It then checks, is this a voice message or a text message? If it's a voice message, it quickly downloads the audio file of that voice message and just uses this transcribe action from OpenAI to turn the audio into text. And here in this set node, in this final one, it just combines the two paths again. The reason for that is no matter which format the feedback message is received in, if it's text or voice, it doesn't matter. This automation here will turn it into text and save it into this feedback field. So here we then just get the feedback as output. In my case, I said good tweet, but please remove all hashtags. It takes that feedback message and deletes it again, because now we no longer need it. It doesn't have to stay in the chat and clutter it. And finally, it goes back to the original automation flow. So we again delete the approval request message because we also no longer need that. Finally, in this webhook call, in this HTTP node, it also sends all of the necessary information back to the original workflow. So in this case, approved and the feedback. You can see in this case the result was approved is false, because if we give feedback, this does not mean that it's approved. But the feedback no longer is empty, it actually contains the exact words that I said when I replied to the message. Let's have a look at this wait node. So here in the first execution of this wait node, you can see this is exactly what it received in the body here. Approved is false, and feedback is this right here. And this data is what this switch node here used to determine where to route the automation. And here it decided, oh, this is actually feedback that we received. So it sent it to this additional feedback implementation AI. This AI basically just has a simple system prompt which says your task is to implement feedback for a previously created tweet, and then a couple of information what it is supposed to do. In the user prompt, I then put the current version of the tweet where I want to implement the feedback and the feedback text itself. So you can see here, this was our actual or original tweet, and then the feedback, good tweet, but please remove all hashtags. If we look at the output, you can see the AI correctly implemented that. So it produced the tweet without all of the hashtags. And now it gets really interesting because it sends that tweet back to this set node right here, to this approval task, and creates a new approval task. And this is why this set node is so important. As soon as we enter this approval loop, we don't want to leave it again. If I were to here in the approval message just reference this original node, this would work for approve and reject, but it would not work for this feedback loop. So this is why this approval task is so important. It allows us to run these repeated loops with multiple iterations, and we no longer reference data outside of this loop. So here we can see we had a second execution run 2 of 2, where we created a new approval task with the updated post text and also the new approval text that says please approve the following tweet, also with the updated post text. We again received that on Telegram. And this is where we are right now. I again have my approval message, and I can approve, I can reject, or send another feedback. You can do as many feedback rounds as you want until you are fully satisfied with the results. In this case, actually I'm going to send another feedback here. So I'm going to reply. Let's do just a normal text message this time. Remove all emojis. So it again receives that and sends us the updated version. You can see now we have the same tweet, but the AI removed all emojis. And now I'm happy with the tweet, so I click on approve. And this time you can see it is no longer sent into another feedback loop, but this time it was routed here to this node here called publish tweet to X. If we look at the wait node, you can see all 3 executions of the wait node contain the specific approval data. The first time we did not approve it, but we said good tweet, please remove all hashtags. The second time it said also not approved, remove all emojis. And for the last execution, you can see the feedback was empty, but approved this time was true, which is why this switch node here decided yes, the tweet is approved and I would like to publish it. This is the basic implementation of this approval system. Now what I would like to do is I would like to give you a couple of recommendations with regards to security. While unlikely, what could happen here is a so-called enumeration attack. So what we have here, we have this webhook, and in theory, someone could go and spam this webhook with lots of different requests where they try to guess your execution ID. Because the structure of this webhook here is quite easy to predict. It's basically just your n8n instance URL or domain, and then /webhook waiting / the execution ID of the current execution, which is just a number that increases every time. So if you want to add an additional layer of security, what you can do here is you can add an option called webhook suffix. And here you just write a random piece of text inside of here, some random characters. If you want, you can go to a website called uuidgenerator.net. And here you can generate random IDs in the UUID format. You just click on enter a number, how many you want, and then you just copy one of these and you can paste them inside of here. And now you can see this webhook here. Yes, it still includes this execution ID, but also this random text at the end, which is basically impossible to guess for someone from the outside. When you do that, also make sure that in your handle approval events workflow, that you also add this here at the end in your webhook response URL. So webhook waiting, then the execution ID, and this random string right here. And now let's quickly test it if it still works. So I click on approve here. You can see the webhook still completed and received all the necessary information, but now it's no longer possible to guess this webhook URL. All right, now there's a second thing that we need to do for security, and that is, in theory, someone could still get access to this webhook URL. With this suffix, we've made it significantly more difficult. However, someone could still get access to it and then would be able to control our approvals just by sending data to that webhook. Which is why for this webhook, we also have to set up some authentication. And that is super easy to do. We can just use n8n's credential for that. I'm going to switch this to authentication header auth, and then create a new credential. I'm going to call this approval system auth. The name, I'm going to call it approval system. And for the value, we now have to define a secret password. I again recommend you can go to this website, uuidgenerator.net, and again, generate some UUIDs and copy one of these here. And then you paste that in here and save it. And now we've set up authentication. However, now that we've set up the authentication for the webhook of the wait node, we also need to use it in our second workflow, the handle approval events workflow. And we have to use it here in this HTTP node when we send the data back to the webhook. So here I set the authentication to generic credential type and also select header auth here. And now I should be able to select the credential, but it's not visible. So I quickly reload this so that it is updated. And now you can see I have access to this approval system auth, which we just set up for the wait node. And let's quickly test this. I'm going to execute this workflow again, approve this automation, and you can see it successfully completes the approval request. However, now this has been done with a much better security setup. Then the next thing that is relevant for security is that you restrict your Telegram trigger to only receive messages from your specific account, from your specific Telegram account, so that if someone by accident finds your Telegram bot, that they cannot control this workflow. By default, how you would do that in n8n is here in the trigger, you would go to add fields and then say restrict to chat IDs and or restrict to user IDs, and then you would enter your specific chat ID. However, the problem with that is this only works for messages. n8n currently has not properly implemented this for callback queries. So this would fail. So for example, here, this is my personal chat ID. If I were to enter this here, then this would work as expected for all messages. However, it would no longer work for the callback queries, which is why in this case, we cannot do this, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do instead here in this approval data, you can see I've already created an expression that extracts the chat ID from Telegram. And now what I can do is I'm going to copy my personal chat ID. You will have to look at the first event that gets submitted here, and then inside of the data here, find your own personal chat ID. And after this set node, I'm going to add a filter. So filter node, let's call this restrict chat IDs. And I create a condition and say that the chat ID from the approval data must always be equal to my personal chat ID. And here you enter your personal chat ID. If I now execute this, you can see this still works because this last event came from my personal chat ID. But now it would no longer work that another person triggers these events from their own Telegram account. All right, and now, in my opinion, the coolest or the best part about this approval system is that this automation here, you have to set it up once and then you can use it for all of your automations. You don't have to set this up for each new automation individually. So right here, in this case, I used it for this tweet generator, but you could use exactly the same structure for a different automation. Obviously then for a different automation that the feedback mechanism here might change a little bit, but this general idea that we send the execution ID to Telegram with these two buttons, and then we get it back with the approval response. This mechanism, you have to build it once, and then it works for all of your automations. All right, so if this is something you enjoyed, then consider getting access to the template. I'll put the link on the screen and the video description and the template. In the template, I will include all of these 3 workflows here. So the one that we looked at today, then the core aspect of this approval system, which is this handle approval events workflow, and then also this small workflow here to parse your Telegram messages. And if this is the first time that you build any Telegram related automation in n8n, then check out this other video that I've recorded about setting up a Telegram connection to n8n. All right, thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. My name is Mike, and I see you in the next one. Bye.